7:13 through 16. Now, again, this is still Stephen talking. He's more towards the famine. I covered earlier how they had to go to Egypt because to get grain. Well, it's Acts 7:13 through 16. So we see this story in Genesis. It's a couple of chapters, and Stephen's kind of briefly going over it because all these people at this time would have known this story, because from the Sadducees who just studied the first 5 books, and then the Pharisees who studied the whole Torah, the law, which is the law. They studied the prophets, the whole Old Testament. They also had a rabbinical interpretation of the Old Testament that the Pharisees probably went by, which is called the Talmud, which was written time of the Babylonian captivity by some priests who were in captive. They did that during that time since there was no temple for them to serve in, so they gave their interpretation of the Torah, the first 5 books at that time. So the Pharisees went off all this. The laws that they fussed about Jesus and the laws about the Sabbath that were added that ain't in Scripture, they were found in the Talmud. The Pharisees considered this religious. But the point is, all these people would have, at this time, known this story. Just him bringing it up, everybody would have been well read enough to know the story of Joseph that Stephen was speaking to. So, the second time they went, Joseph revealed his identity to his brothers, and they were introduced to Pharaoh. So, in parts that Stephen leaves out of the story, one of the brothers, I believe it was Simon, had to stay behind until they returned again, because they told them about their brother Benjamin, and Joseph told them unless they bring Benjamin and their father, Benjamin, that he's not going to release him, and that he can come back next time and get them when they bring Benjamin. So at this point, they're having this argument with Jacob, and we see this in Genesis, not here in Acts, that they ain't able to go back, and Jacob's telling them to go back to get some more grain. They're like, we can't go back without Benjamin. They're like, you ain't going to take my Benjamin. And so Jacob's folding with him. He's like, then we ain't able to go get grain unless we go take Benjamin with us. At this time, Simon's in prison over in Egypt because they haven't yet come back. And I believe it's Judah that steps up and is like, Benjamin's my responsibility. I'll make sure Benjamin, if not, you can. And he pretty much offers his 2 sons for the protection of Benjamin. So they go, they get their grain. But Joseph ends up putting a cup in a bag of grain that Benjamin's carrying. At this time, it's probably debated how old Benjamin may be. He's probably a teenager, maybe in his 20s. He's the youngest of all of them, no. So he puts a cup in it, and Joseph plants the cup. So he sends guards after them to retrieve the cup, and it's found in Benjamin's bag, unknowing to the brothers. He does this to see the attitude of the brothers, because he was the youngest at the time. He was a favored child, which Benjamin, we see from Genesis account, is still favored. So we see that their hearts change because they take up for their little brother, which Joseph wanted to see if they've changed, which is why he did that. Upon realizing they changed, he reveals himself to them. And then they get introduced to Pharaoh. They're his family. Joseph is pretty much royalty because of him saving Egypt from this great destruction. Egypt was recognized visionaries and all people like that in a high position. Anyway, the fact that he saved them through this vision put him even higher. Then Joseph sent to his father Jacob and all his brothers' families to come to Egypt, 75 persons in all. Now, This is after they go back, bring grain to their father. They go back to their father not to bring the grain. They do on their journey because they got it with them. But they go back and get their father to bring him back. Because as soon as he hears Joseph's alive, Jacob's ready to go. And these other people that come with him are their kids, their wives. So these are the people that are there left in Egypt. And we see how this transcends. These are the number that it mentions this part, and again in the first few chapters of Exodus. So Jacob came to Egypt, where he died, and all his sons. So they all pass away. We see after Jacob passes away that his brothers has a concern that he's going to betray them because of what they did for him. Him showing them grace as God does with us, but they were afraid that he was going to show them justice, which it would have been just if he did anything to them because of what they did for him. At which point he explains to them, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And then he pretty much tells them not to worry about it again. And he's actually hurt that they think by this point, which could have been years later, it isn't mentioned, that they still don't trust him. So he's actually bothered by this. Well, all of them end up dying. We see how Jacob's buried in Canaan in the tomb that Abraham bought. The brothers really ain't mentioned where they're buried, but most likely they were buried in that tomb as well. It is mentioned that Joseph is mummified because he was Egyptian royalty pretty much by that point because of what he did. Because we see how they carry back his bones when they go to the land of Canaan to put him in the tomb. Well, it's safe to assume that all the other brothers were buried in that tomb with their wives as well. So Jacob, all of them were taken to Shechem and buried. Yeah, we see it here in the tomb Abraham brought from his sons of Hamor and Shechem's father. Now, they weren't allowed to carry Joseph's bones out because they were part of that land. They eventually got there, but we see how God uses them and God works through them. We learn mercy and love through the story of Joseph, how people may wrong us, but we're to be kind and generous to them. Jesus shows this story. We as a church are show this to others. No matter how they wrong us, we're to trust in God through it and trust in Him that He's got something better for us and help them if opportunity permits it. We see later, we'll cover next week, how they're persecuted in Egypt. But the fact is, the world is going to mistreat us and they might have a problem trusting us. We're to love them. As Christians, we're to show love to them. We're to show Christ's love to them because they're not going to see Christ's love out in the world. And his brothers needed forgiveness, and Joseph was able to give it to them. The world needs love. And without Christ, we're to show them Him through that love we give to them. And through that, they may be able to benefit and come to Christ. And they will be blessed because of it, and we will be blessed.